Welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys, sponsored by Checker, background screens for your faith or volunteer organization. The Church Safety Guys is a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to inspire, influence, and impact church safety and security teams. We are protectors, guardians, ambassadors, and shepherds. We are about all things church safety and security, which starts with a ministry mindset and a servant's heart. Join us for the next hour as the Church Safety Guys unpack safety, security, leadership, and ministry operations with your hosts, James McGarvey, Paul Buckner, and Mike Scully. This broadcast is also available on social media, YouTube, your favorite podcast platforms, and on the all-new Church Security app.
Well, welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys. I am James, and I'm joined by Mike this evening.
What's up, sir?
It's been a long week, and
tell me about it.
It's always like this is the last bit of energy on the weekend. This
is supposed to be the beginning of a week, and we're supposed to rest on Sundays. But anyhow,
is it? Yeah, I'm still at a loss for that. But we're where you guys were about 4 weeks ago. So we're in the middle of tearing our house apart and
packing.
And I feel like I'm a air traffic controller trying to direct suitcases for the five of us. And then my oldest daughter, who is living in California now, she is actually flying out to meet us in Florida for vacation. So it'll be fun. I haven't gotten a chance to see her since August, and
that'll be nice.
But what's funny about it is she keeps messaging me and my wife, and she's like, "Should I pack this? Can I pack this? Can I?" So it's really we're back to directing six people here.
Well, it sounds like a pro tip. So the 3 weeks we did on the road with 3 kids, so 5 of us total, everybody got their own individualized colored duffel bag, and I'm not kidding. And so everybody's bag was,
believe you, I know,
it was already set. We knew what was whose. We knew, okay, if we need this, it's in that bag. If we need this, it's in that bag. My wife kind of put everything together with outfits and all the different baby stuff and everything we needed to be. So it kept some of our sanity, keyword being some, but it was a lot of fun either way. But yeah, getting out of the house can be crazy.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But we've gotten to that point where every person has their suitcase, and of course, whenever you go on vacation, there are times like my wife and I were talking about going out to dinner, a nice like dress up dinner, just the two of us, and so we're talking about, okay, so do I wear a sports coat? Do I bring a tie? And then, okay, well, that's a different suitcase. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. So actually next week, we will be taking off, but you'll be able to see a brand new episode we recorded this past week with Checker, one of our sponsors. And so great conversation we had with them about background checks. So we'll play that for you guys, and that'll be set up to go. So you'll still have a brand new episode. And I just did a count for the end of the season, end of the year, and we're actually pushing almost 100 now, 100 episodes.
Wow.
So we'll probably hit the 100th one sometime in January.
That is why we are so tired.
Maybe.
Well, at least I think because we double dipped this week and did 2.
And that's it. So next week we'll be definitely talking about the background checks, and then the following week we're actually going to be talking about the conference. So we're going to go back through and just kind of, hopefully the 3 of us will be talking about how that goes or how that went, how that goes. Mm-hmm. And it'll be a fun time. So anyhow, I will bring in our guest this evening. No stranger to church safety and security, a genuine expert and good friend, Mr. Daniel Blevins. So how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Thank you for joining us. Thanks
Absolutely.
for hanging out with the madness.
Yeah, it's good to be back on.
See, that's the real key there. He came back.
He did.
We didn't scare him away.
Not quite yet. We'll give it some time.
Yeah, I scared Paul away apparently.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, Paul is taking his vacation now, so he's probably listening on the road and like, stop talking about me. No, he's probably not even thinking about us.
His ears are ringing.
Right.
Oh wait, that was the doorbell.
Yeah.
So, Dan, for those of our listeners that don't recognize your name, if you could just kind of share a little bit of your experience with church safety and where you're at today. And I know a few folks have reached out and kind of asked about your podcast and what your thoughts are for that as well. So I want to give you the opportunity to come out of the seclusion and
Sure.
and chat with us.
Yeah, for all of us, 2020 was a unique animal, and it definitely. At the time, I was with CV Ministries, and didn't feel released from God up until about December, January timeframe. I kind of looked at my wife. I said, and we had talked about it before, and we both just kind of felt released from. She was on staff at our church. That God had us going in a different direction. At least for the, we hadn't done seminars. We hadn't had any income for a year from my income, from being able to do church security like we were with seminars. Continued the podcast, still have resources, DVDs and my book and things that are still available. But, God definitely had a different plan. And so I just started putting out feelers in different directions. And it was kind of interesting, all the different jobs I applied for, both in Colorado and up here in Washington State. And we picked Washington State as the other place to kind of look, just because we're both from here. We haven't been here in 20 years. It is not the place I would pick anywhere on the map to live if it wasn't for family being here. And God definitely opened the door this direction. It was the cool thing is we've been able to see his hand through it all. I'm the director of operations for a school district, a Christian school district up here. And I oversee technology, transportation, facilities, and the deli at the high school. Nice. Falls under my leadership. And I've got some good managers under me, which is great, and safety and security. So the cool thing is I'm stepping into a role that I've had very little into the educational realm of things from a safety and security standpoint. And so it's kind of fun to be able to take what I've done church security wise for the last 13 years into the educational piece and to see, okay, how can we bring this to where it needs to be from that standpoint as well on each. So that's kind of where we're at. Like I said, I've been doing church security for about 13 years, serving at my church. Did 7 years of seminars, traveling with, what was sheepdog seminars at the time with Carl Chin and Jimmy Meeks and Dave Grossman, and then started doing my own seminars for the last few years. And that was, it had a blast. Love training, love teaching, love just fellowshipping with the other people that are trying to do it well. And, just like you guys do, you guys enjoy it, being able to say, okay, how can we come alongside you and give you the resources, advice, whatever that looks like to help you to do it well. So I don't know going forward. So the podcast, I took it, I didn't want my previous employer to cancel it. So I went in and changed everything to my name and my accounts and just to hang on to it. I don't think that God didn't have me do that for so long and influence the community like we did, the church community, and then just leave it. So I'm still trying to figure out what it is, but I know for a fact, you guys are talking about doing two podcasts this week. When I was doing it full time, I would do 3 or 4 a week, and it is exhausting. And I was putting out a podcast every week. But I would record them ahead of time, edit them in the whole 9 yards. So I definitely don't have the time for that. So now that I'm working full time back in the, employment of, like you guys are too, you're doing it both. We all have jobs. And so just trying to get a good balance of what does that look like and what does God have in store going forward. I got a few ideas. I have a book idea and some research I kind of want to do along those lines that takes a look at the last year and how did 2020 affect not just church security, but other ministries. It had a unique effect on what happened with people. And it's not a critical look. I want to hear both sides. Like, why did you choose what you chose, good or bad in it? Just to kind of take a look at how it's impacted, and particularly church security, how it impacted church security across the country to where so many churches right now are finding themselves rebuilding and or just starting from scratch in many cases. And that kind of leads to what we wanted to talk about tonight anyway on that is how do we, what does that look like to do that well, to get started again?
Sure. Yeah, that's a fascinating topic to me. And I would be interested to read it, and see your take on it going through, because I know some of the churches that we've talked to have been so divided about, why are you doing what you're doing? And, of course, in the church safety realm for the last year, I've had churches reach out to me or to us in our ministry and comment that, they're just having a really hard time because like their church leadership has asked them to police, wearing masks. And now I heard actually not too long ago that some safety teams were being asked by their church leadership to check vaccine records for folks coming in. And, there's so much politics that's draped over all of that. And, with our stuff over the couple of years that we've been doing this, we've carefully managed to navigate staying away from, staying away from that. But at the same time, it's like with the last year, all of that's been kind of dumped in all of our laps to relearn. Okay, this is how we're supposed to act with each other. And, I don't know. It's a crazy thing.
It is. And with being now that I'm in the school system, the rules are totally different. I mean, if we want to stay open as a school, and the school district stayed open all of 2020, when everybody else was closed, the public schools were closed, they were able to stay open. But it is a whole different ball game. So no matter what my personal feelings are one way or another, I have to look at it from the school's perspective, and are we staying in compliance with what's being asked of us from the state, just so that we can function and serve the families that we're serving. On the same note, to a degree, is that, I have to consider what do my reactions, am I furthering the gospel or am I hindering the gospel by how I react to what's going on as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's definitely a hard thing to navigate, because part of, and it's interesting you drew that connection, because I had a church ask me this past week why I believed membership was so important to serve in safety and security at the church. And one of the reasons I feel it's important is because if the leadership asks you to do something and it's in compliance, or it's, recognizing what has been asked of them by the local municipal authorities, that sort of thing, But even beyond that, I mean, you might not always 100% agree with what you're being asked, right? So it's kind of having that wisdom to determine and decide that, even though I might not 100% ask or agree with what is being said here right now, I need to respect the fact that they're leaders and their place is, and I've submitted to them, right, as
Right.
in that membership process, and I've submitted to them as leaders. So I need to respect and show that respect. And I think, unfortunately, respect today looks a little bit different than it did even 2 years ago, with a lot of what's going on. And that doesn't mean you don't stand up for what you believe is right. It just means that, we can have a dialogue and a friendly discussion about this or a viewpoint, and then walk away and not be killing each other.
Right.
I think there's a difference between standing up for, hey, you're not letting me have the color shirt my team wants to wear, or being stubborn over, I want to run this team a certain way, or you asked me to run this, and letting ego enter the picture versus conviction and bigger things. I think when we start talking about this past year and the impacts that it's had on teams, including our safety teams, I think that's that challenge, is when you introduce new scope, that's not just hey, we disagree on, you say do it this way, I say do it this way. No, this is brand new scope that you want to introduce to my team without having had a conversation. You just want to roll it out. That's where I say, pause. This needs discussion and conversation, not in a hallway, not in a 5 minutes before service, hey, you're doing this. This needs a conversation. And I think that's an opportunity and a duty for those of us as leaders to push back on something like that, because getting scope pushed on us, even by leadership in that capacity, at that kind of delivery, is not good, because then we as leaders can't take that, internalize it, plan with it, and roll it out to our team effectively if it came to us wrong. And so that's that proverbial snowball of it rolling downhill. Let's stop it rolling downhill before we steamroll our teams with something that caught us off guard.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's one of the things, that I think I might have said more in doing church safety and security than don't ask me what type of gun you can carry. And that's, the idea that a lot of times, and I struggle with it on a regular basis too. Like when my leadership comes to me and says something, my response is, hey, immediate, like I'm thinking now, I'm assessing now. Or, when I walk into the church building, I see a different, I have a different mentality, different mindset. So I see, oh, okay, this needs to be discussed. I need to talk to the leadership about this. Yeah. And it works both ways. But the reality is, we get folks that talk a lot about being frustrated because their leadership isn't paying attention. But you kind of have to set the stage to have that discussion. And 99% of the conversations that we would have in church safety and security can't happen on a Sunday morning in between services. Right. It's a conversation where you need to say to the leadership, hey, I really need to talk to you about this. Can I, maybe have a phone call, or maybe can we get together this next week and sit down and have this communication? And I think that, honestly, I think people would be a lot more successful understanding and realizing that a knee-jerk reaction, if you go to a pastor and you say, hey, something like a large topic, like, I don't know, we'll say firearms. You go to your pastor and you say, hey, can we carry firearms? And you're asking him in between the two services, guess what? You guys know where I'm going with this. The answer is probably going to be no, because he hasn't had time to think about everything, right? And you're like, hey, I was researching blah blah blah. But if you take the time and actually sit down with them and say, okay, this is what I was thinking, this is what other churches like us are doing, this is why I'm thinking this is my justification, this is what I want to do, and kind of put it in a package of understanding, planning, presenting, I mean, I guarantee there have been times where I've sat down with my pastor, my senior pastor, and I thought he's going to say no to this. And I outlined everything. I stood my ground. I supported everything. And he's like, yeah, okay, let's do it. And I'm like, what just happened?
Yeah.
But it's not a 5-minute conversation. It's realizing that, in a lot of cases, leadership doesn't want to say no. It's just, it's planning. And that's honestly, to kind of shift gears a little, that's what we wanted to talk about tonight, is just planning and the benefit of looking at that at multiple angles. And in church safety and security, we've talked to quite a few churches recently where it seems like they're getting frustrated, and I will say what Paul normally says, which is, you don't know what you don't know. He's not here, but I'll quote his line. But at the same time, if you're starting a team, if you're trying to come back after COVID, if you're trying to be successful with the team, part of the component to be successful is planning. So, whether you have a budget or not, whether you have a training schedule or not, if you're not actively trying to set a culture of planning, then it can really be a hindrance to you when you're trying to run your team. So
it takes
Go ahead,
Dan.
Go ahead, Mike. All
right. It takes a different approach. You got to look at it from no differently than where you should start your year. When people start a year out, they tend to have that New Year's resolution, that forward looking, that what are you going to do? And that leads to typically planning. And you'll see that planners are the biggest number selling item in January, because everybody's wanting to get back on some sort of plan. And I think that's the idea, is if we're restarting, if we're going back with a new set of volunteers, or you don't have the capacity or bodies that you had before, well, that's restarting. And that requires kind of vision casting again for, what do I want to do? What opportunities do I have? What problems do I have? And where am I going? Okay. Where do I see this 3, 6, 12 months from now? Where am I trying to go? Set that as a target. Now work yourself back.
For sure.
Yeah,
Dan,
absolutely.
You were going to jump in there.
Well, I was just going to say, going back to, like that conversation, having that foundational conversation with the pastor and the leadership, even, especially there's a lot of new leaders that are stepping up into these roles too, and to where you can find out, it's showing them the value. It's just like anything, that sales wise, to a degree, what's the value to the church for having the team? But then that can kind of help if you go in, I think, and have that conversation to where you're putting them first and not your agenda. You might have a direction you want it to go, but truly listening to the heart of the church and coming to the compromise, because there's so many people that as they're getting started get frustrated because they're not getting everything. There's a video, and you've seen it, James, that I start the seminar off with, that talks about that. So you didn't get the high-speed gear. So what? So you didn't get the funding, does that change how we serve? No, we still serve, and we still show them that we value, their opinions, their desires, and here's the value we bring to the church.
For sure. One of the things Kevin in Michigan just mentioned, and I just want to share it because I like it, and I think it makes a lot of sense. But he just shared plan to allow for your ideas to percolate with the leadership, because leadership may well come back and restate your plan in a different way, but accomplish the same goal.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I mean, honestly, and understanding that big topics might need to be revisited. Just because you get a no doesn't mean it's not there's a difference between not right now and no, and let's revisit this in a couple of months. And, if you're passionate about a particular policy or procedure or piece of equipment or something like that, understand that the leadership of the church, in a lot of cases, even especially if it's a smaller church, they're juggling multiple things at multiple times. Resources might be light or limited. And you saying, if they come out and they come back and they're like, no, we're not going to do that. Ask them why, and not disrespectfully, but say, hey, do you mind if we talk about this in another month or two? Can we come back and can we revisit this topic? Because I really feel that this is important, or maybe, explain to me what you're thinking. And that's where that listening that you just mentioned comes in, Dan, because it's like, you can't go in. I mean, you can go in to the conversation in the meeting, trying to plan out, trying to expect certain results, but at the same time, understand that, it's an actual conversation. So, when you sit down and you talk, you need to be listening to what they're saying too, and not just, and that's hard for everyone. I'm not saying one particular individual, or church, because there are times when I'll get heated up about a particular topic or budget or something. And, we were getting ready to, and in fact, actually 2 weeks ago, I was going over next year's budget for my church. And we were looking at some things. We were actually in the middle of trying to figure out if we could buy some new radios and, new equipment and that sort of thing. And, the facility guy was like, hey, I think it's a great idea. I think we can swing it. Let's go. And literally a week later, he, which I appreciated, he messaged me and he's like, I think we need to push this back. And I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, well, we're having issues with the lights in the sanctuary and the dimmer switch, and the system's really old. And now I found out that we may have to completely redo this and this and this. And I've got to, so all of this unexpected stuff comes up all the time. And I'm like, okay, now at this point, it's back in my court, right? I can be a jerk about it and be like, well, why aren't you guys ever paying, why aren't you ever doing this? Why is this is budgeted? We're supposed to, or I can be flexible and I can say, you know what? I understand sometimes even the best laid plans, you have to put on hold, and, we have to reassess. So, in that type of situation or conversation, I might easily say something like, okay, I understand that. Can I come back and talk to you or check in on this in another month or two? And when we get past, figuring this situation out and come back to this, Mike, you wanted to jump in there?
It could be a test, frankly. I seem to recall a certain story about talents and being trusted with a few and then being given many. And I think there can be times where, it may not be a formalized test, but it can be a test. It can be a test of how are you willing to serve in the capacity that you're in, even when it's tough, even when you don't have the right tools and the right equipment and the right size team. Are you going to serve faithfully coming back from COVID, even though it's not under the same conditions you served pre-COVID? Or are you going to take your ball and go home? And I think that's the idea of a test that could be happening with some, and there are other priorities. So I think reviewing those problems, reviewing those opportunities, taking an inventory of what are those needs, not just equipment-wise, but kind of stack ranking what are those needs, and being sure that you're not asking for this, or every time you have a conversation, your hand is out asking for something. I think that's a big thing as well. So you got to start to forecast. Well, this is what we need now, but also before you buy new radios, do you have a plan for maintenance of other equipment that you might need? Or are you going to all of a sudden get brand new shiny radios and something else you need breaks? And now you're stuck because you just spent all that money when you could have made the radios that you had go a little bit further. And right. now you're down. So it's about a total picture of understanding what's necessary and doing that evaluation and right. prioritization before you ask for something.
For sure.
I think changing gears just a little bit, but it falls right along those same lines, is to help assessing those needs. and I encouraged a lot of churches in 2020 to take the time to do this, because a lot of them weren't meeting, but it should be almost an annual thing anyway, is taking a look at your policies and procedures and your, because of how fluid things are all the time. And nobody likes to sit down and take a look at those really and go through them because it's time consuming. But from a liability standpoint, from a flow with leadership standpoint, yeah, because things have changed. Maybe leadership's changed and the view of things and how it works. If churches are asking their security team to be that, to monitor masks or whatever else, okay, well, that's a whole different policy or a procedure that needs to be put into the book for now.
Sure.
And it doesn't, in churches, a lot of people get overwhelmed by policies and procedures. It's got to be really simple.
Right.
We're not talking a high tech, three ring binder books, 3-inch binder books of it.
Oh man, that means I got to get mine out of a 3. I got get rid of my 3-ring binder. Thanks, Dan.
But because you're working with volunteers,
right?
And a lot of the leaders are volunteers themselves, to where it's got to be easy read, easy follow. In that, so then that will help you to better assess what are your equipment needs now, and like that 5-year plan,
right.
down the road. For
sure. Mike, you wanted to jump in there?
Well, it plays right off of that there, Dan. Is there's a term called RAID, and not as in a raid by SWAT, but a RAID as in what are your risks, what actions do you have to take on a regular basis. Has that changed? What issues or anything that might you have that you now have to overcome? And what decisions do we make? So going to that last one, decisions. Revisiting, you made decisions for your team, for your church, for your ministry,
right,
on the basis of your church operating a certain way. So the context under which you made a decision this certain way was under that context. If that context is changed, that decision needs to be revisited. And I think it's not just from an annual planning standpoint or just a coming back from COVID. I think, again, when conditions change from which you made that decision, it's worth revisiting the decision, not to overturn it, but to just understand that has enough change that it says maybe we should consider this differently, or are we going to let it stand, essentially, even though we know what we know now?
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
For sure. And I definitely want to come back and talk about it some more after the break, but we're going to go ahead and take a quick sponsor break, and then we'll be right back with you. So don't go anywhere.
Nobody thinks it will happen to them, but with over 2,000 emergency phone calls per month to our independent program attorney answered hotline, it's closer to home than you think. At US Law Shield, we give you exclusive access to our 24/7, 365 emergency hotline, not a call center, direct access to our network of independent program attorneys. With a price point of only $10.95 per month and unlimited attorney hours for criminal and civil defense, US Law Shield provides you with unparalleled service and protection where it matters most. No other program comes close. We believe an educated member is an empowered member. We do this by providing educational resources featuring seasoned attorneys, firearms instructors, law enforcement, and experts in all areas of self-defense law. We at US Law Shield believe peace of mind should come with simple and affordable protection.
With over 50 years of experience with religious and nonprofit organizations, Thomas Alexander Insurance & Associates understands that your congregation is different from a traditional business. We're here to fulfill your needs, coming to you while creating a personal plan for your budget and size. From your local community to around the globe, we are advocates for you. Thomas Alexander Insurance & Associates, your partner in service.
What if there was a program so uniquely structured that it would help you protect your congregation and, at the same time, help you develop best practices to grow your ministry and to be impactful in your community? What if there was a biblical resource that would offer thousands of hours of training and experience to guide you in keeping your ministry safe and secure and being prepared for the unexpected? What if you could have the collective instruction from public safety and security experts from all over the world at your disposal to help you with a biblical view of safety and security? Impossible, you say? Unlikely? It would be unheard of for someone to create something like that. We just did. Introducing the new biblically based 1-year certificate and associate's degree program in church safety and security. Developed by the Church Safety Guys and Centurion Bible College, this program is designed to give you the best of everything possible. Learn on your schedule, at your convenience, with experienced industry leaders, and receive college credit for it. Enhance your learning on protecting your ministry and community today. For more information, visit centurionbc.org or churchsafetyguys.com. Enroll to begin your path of biblical education and learning today.
The Church Safety Guys help church and place of worship safety and security teams all over North America through our broadcasts, online communities, conferences, trainings, resources, and the all-new Church Security app. Download it today. Help us continue to reach churches by supporting our sponsors, purchasing our resources, and consider becoming a ministry partner by making a monthly or one-time donation. Remember to like, subscribe, and share this broadcast with your team. And now, back to the broadcast.
All right, welcome back to the Church Safety and Security broadcast. And I am James, and I have Mike with me today. And our guest for this evening is Mr. Daniel Blevins. And we're just talking about planning. And one of the things that we mentioned right before the break was, Daniel, you mentioned using the COVID time or the less busy time to look at your policy and bring that forward and kind of go through it. And one of the things, and I know we've talked about it before on the broadcast and with churches, but one of the things that I typically do each year, once a year, is I will actually plan out, and I have access to my church's calendar. And that's one of the things I would recommend. Talk to the individual that plans out your events for the year, the activities. If it's all the pastors that get together, usually what happens at my church is all the pastors will get together. They'll go away for the weekend. They'll have this giant calendar and they'll map stuff out. They'll mark stuff, and then they'll come back, and then it gets put on the church calendar. And the church calendar actually, they just recently uploaded it into, I think it was Outlook. But there's 7, like our church runs 7 calendars, and each one of those calendars has a different purpose. Like it'll say regular services, guest speakers, events with the church, when an outside individual has booked a room, whatever, everything's on there. And so this year I went to them and I said, would you do me a favor? And they're like, sure, what's up? And I said, can you just add that, like send it to me, like copy me, add me to the calendar. And they're like, yeah, that's fine. Don't know why we didn't do that before. And I'm like, yeah, I don't either. I'm like, but if I see that now, a lot of times I can see what's going to happen before it's happening. So I can plan, okay, we have a guest coming in on this day, and it just gives me more time and more peace of mind. But what I've done is I've actually taken that calendar and for myself made my own calendar. And I've said, okay, at this point in time, this is when, October is when our budgets are due. January is usually statistically for incidents is slower. So January is typically where I meet with my leadership on my ministry team, and I'll sit down and go through the policy with them. And I'll say, okay, what happened in the last year based on our incidents would you change? Let's make this, let's go through it. So we'll go through it. One of the churches, I think it was, I was going to say one of the churches that listened, but it was actually Mike. You sent me, a church had sent you a copy of a policy and breakout. And I looked at it and I'm like, you know what? I love the style. It's easy. It's simple to understand. It's bullet points. And, it's like 10 pages to my 30 pages of policy writing. And right. So all of our policy has been updated, has been changed, has been approved. But when I started looking at it, I'm like, we're just so to the point where it's confusing. It's hard for people to understand. So let's make it easier, right? Because everybody has a lot on their mind. There's no reason why, you can't go from, and we did it actually. We revamped everything. We went from like 30 pages down to 16. So we cut it in half. And I passed it around to the other pastors and they're like, this is awesome. Like, let's laminate it. Let's give it to everybody. It's a quick reference guide. It's very specific, but, so just because you have something set, and I'll go back to the planning piece of it, just because you have something set doesn't mean you don't revisit it or go back and say, okay, it's been a year. What do we need to update? What can we change? What can we address? And, there's certain aspects of it. Not every church has a budget. Obviously not every church can afford to do stuff, but there are times where, you kind of have to think, okay, if you're being trained to do something, like you're being trained on how to use an AED and your thought process is, I want to get an AED, maybe that's something, and your church doesn't have one. Maybe that's a capital expense, or maybe that's something you can say, we'll do the training this year, and next year instead of doing the training, we're going to invest the money and actually purchase that unit. But even to your point, Dan, and then I'll let you jump in, what you mentioned before the break about not having resources and still doing what you can with what you have. For years we did that. And that ties back into what I always say with building credibility and building that ministry and building awareness. And, a few years ago we had a capital expense for radios, and it was getting to the point where it was crazy. Like, we really needed new radios because ours were falling apart. And one of the trustees in the church, asked the deacons and asked all the church, and they, asked the leadership, and he blatantly said, what can I help purchase? What large purchase item does the safety and security team need? And that blew me away. And so the pastor came to me and he's like, you're getting one check. What piece of equipment can you not do without? And I said, you know what? I said, we've been duct taping these radios for 3 years now and trying to make do. I really would like to just upgrade everything and fix it. And he's like, okay, done. That's what we're doing. But if I hadn't had the thought previously in my mind to kind of organize things and even write it down and say, okay, this is what we're going to train on. This is our equipment. This is our expenses. This is what we need to replace. This is what we need to fix. And even AEDs require regular maintenance and upkeep, which is an expense. You can't just buy it and stick it on the wall. You have to update the pads, the batteries, right? And that stuff can get costly and expensive too. So, but I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah. Going back a little bit to the policy procedure piece and the getting started. A lot of people don't know, a lot of leaders don't know, and it may not be their strong point, but what does training look like? And how do I train? What do I train? And oftentimes I'll tell people it's those policies and procedures that you just wrote that can be a good foundation to start to train, to build scenarios from, to bring, and maybe you have somebody else that's a little bit better in that role that on the team that you can bring alongside. You're not expected as the leader to do it all. At least you shouldn't be. This is where it's healthy for us guys in particular to rub shoulders with other guys and do life together. And this is a good way to do it, is to where you bring in a committee and I hate that term really, but a few individuals that you can do life with in this way,
Right.
with a box of pizza, and you're sitting around and you're drawing up the next training, and what does that look like? So it's valuable training when people show up. Nothing's more frustrating than showing up and nobody really knows what the training is going to look like. And there's really no training. It's just a great meeting that you guys got together, and hopefully there was bacon served. But other than that, not much in the way of training.
You need that fellowship for sure, but
absolutely you do. There needs to be that piece in
right.
it. Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting because we typically we do shooting every fall, and this year, we the particular place, I'm still trying to work out the details, and it's interesting how once you get in a rhythm and a pattern of doing something every year at the same time, like people are coming to me, and I haven't said anything about it because I'm still trying to work out the details, and everybody's like, so are we shooting this year? What's going on? We always do a barbecue and we do we go shooting together. But no, you're absolutely right. And I do think it's funny. And sometimes it can be frustrating because that's the other side of the spectrum, right? A lot of times we're like, why doesn't anybody ever show up for our training? Like you have 30 people, 10 show up, 15 show up, maybe. And, but the other side of that is it can be just as frustrating when it's not planned. Like when people show up and they're like, hey, I'm here. What are we going to do? And you're like, yeah, do it on your own.
Yeah.
But I'll throw it over to you, Mike, because I know you want to add stuff.
Yeah, I think so. It's not just planning for what is that training going to be. I think there's churches that are blessed with some money and can then go spend it on training. And the problem is they get so excited about something or other, squirrel, this consultant, that consultant, and they go off and they blow all their money on one thing. Now, I'm not saying that there's not trainings out there that are not great to put that money in. The difference is you have to understand not only up front, making the case for one, even if you're blessed with that money, but also understand is after the fact is you need to make sure that that was a wise investment so that the following year you don't realize, again, maybe I should have put that money somewhere else. So again, the idea is always ensuring that it's going to the right thing and having those risks and opportunities looked at up front, having those policies and procedures reviewed, having a skills assessment of your team done before you go and hire a training or before you talk to a consultant. That's the key, because at that point now you can say, you know what, we thought we were going to do this because that's what we've been talking about for 6 months or a year, but we did a skills assessment and realized that this is where our gap is. This is where we need to invest. And as a result, we're going to shore up that gap instead of what we were kind of projecting out. And I think that's the play.
Yep, well, absolutely.
Projecting out, I mean, that's the key. There's nothing wrong, especially if you're starting off, there's nothing wrong with doing a formal training, having people come in to kind of set the stage, right? You set the foundation. These are some good topics, move forward. But the reality is so much can be done. We've talked before, the state of Ohio Emergency Management Agency has tabletop exercises you can download and print off free. And, we even had, I thought it was recently, but it might've been a year ago. All my broadcasts are blending together, but we had an EMA rep on, Gary Lehman, and you can go back and look at some of our broadcasts because he was on one and did a great job. But one of the easiest things, it's not about money. It doesn't necessarily have to cost something. You can print that off and give people different roles very easily and sit down and walk through that tabletop exercise, and it's enough to get people thinking. Now, would you ever 100% be trained on on a subject like that? Probably not. But you know what? It doesn't matter if you are or not, because the reality is you're never going to be 100% trained up on one thing. I don't know, I can do CPR and first aid until I'm blue in the face, take classes and teach it. But there's always something that I can literally, right? But there's always something.
Thank you, Paul. Fill in.
There you go.
Yeah. Sorry.
But there's always something that I can look at and say, okay, wait a second, this is, somebody else can teach it. If you taught it, Dan, I would get a different perspective on it than from how I've taught it or listened to it. So, people looking at going back to like the skills assessment and the assessment that Mike was talking about, people look at who you have with you. And just because you're the leader doesn't mean that you have to be in charge of training. You can delegate that and say, hey, put a schedule together, plan out the next year, every other month, a topic that we need to get together and talk about. One of the most recent ones that we did was actually mental health. And it was actually one of your videos, Dan. I played it through, had everybody watch it, and I stopped it at different points. And I said, okay, let's talk about this. This is a valid point. How would you handle it? And then I gave him scenarios and said, how would you handle it if this happened at your church? Or
scenarios are so good for learning.
Yeah. So, but Mike, did you want to jump?
Yeah, I want to we've kind of gone in a couple ways. So if we go forward, we'll kind of talk about the fact that planning itself, there are typically 4 different types of planning. We've talked a bit about upfront about strategic planning, i.e. rebooting, casting vision. Where are we going with the team for the year? What do we got to do in the next 6-12 months? We've talked a bit about tactically about training and different sorts of procedures and policy and where do we want to go. We've talked a little bit of operations, equipment and calendars and schedules and working with other ministries and your pastor. But there's one other that we really haven't touched on yet, and it's contingency planning. I think one of those areas that we have an opportunity to make sure that we're part of those discussions with our leadership is contingency planning. If this happens, what will the church do? And I'm not talking about in the moment operation, like not our response plan, which we've talked about, but what are we going to do if, we lost use of our primary worship facility for 3 weeks? What if it's 3 months? What if it's over a year because the whole building goes away? Okay. What is that contingency planning and what does that look like? Because you need to be prepared for implementing that on a dime, because you may find out Saturday, you're not having your church tomorrow in the building you planned. And rather than being in a situation where we have to scramble for some adjustment because it's 24 hours before, if you have a contingency plan already in place, if you have continuity plans in place where you're saying, if we lost use of our worship facility, this is our temporary, this is where we would go likely in our one-time spot. If it was going to be a longer period of time and we had to do a major renovation or something where we needed to now rent a space for a period of time, this is where we're going to set up those agreements. So again, planning can be about contingency planning and walking through all those things that would impact your team. So now you can, not just on a dime, but you can have already prepared and planned for, what if I'm not serving my safety team in this church today, I'm now serving it over here in this building. What are those considerations? What are my risks there? What things do I need to change? What do I have to do to adapt? You do that up front with contingency planning.
Yep, that's absolutely a great point.
Absolutely. And not everyone always wants to think about that. Maybe that's why, because it's always like, okay, you're Captain Doom and you're thinking about, but the bad stuff. But the reality is if we're not thinking about it, if we're not at least addressing it and talking about the possibility, then, 2 years ago, who would have thought that we would be navigating a pandemic, and I had several conversations with my church leaders when in Ohio, the governor asked, places of worship and faith-based institutions to willingly close in some capacity and go online because of, trying to
2 weeks to flatten the curve.
Yeah, flatten the curve and all that stuff. And again, whether you agree, and I'm not going down that rabbit hole, and we don't have a lot of time left, but when I was talking to the senior pastor, I said, well, how are we going to handle this? And he's like, this is unprecedented. Like, who would have thought that we would get a call from the governor's office saying, you're a larger church in Columbus, in Central Ohio. Can you do this? And so, I mean, they talked about it. Like, they got all of the leadership together to discuss it and put a plan together. But that's the type of thing. I mean, we wouldn't have thought 2 years ago that conversation would be, being held, and we wouldn't expect to get a call from the governor's office saying, this is what we want to do. We're asking you for your support. Right. And so we've learned that. So if there's one thing, to walk away thinking of on that realm with the contingency planning, is that, what we've got to plan for the unexpected, because if we're not planning for the unexpected, or at least talking about it, then maybe not zombie apocalypse attacking the church. I haven't quite gotten to that one yet, but
I'm picturing that you see in some workplaces, the OSHA map where it says we've had 57 days without an accident on the facility. Well, think of it that way: is if you've had 57 weeks on your safety team without something that's changed your entire paradigm of how you look at your safety team, you're due. Okay, yeah. Something's likely to happen, more likely than it's not. So the idea is that we can't rest on our laurels. We have to always be planning. And it's not just for that what if might happen, but it's planning on an ongoing basis to say, you know what, let's be prepared. Let's plan accordingly, and let's plan and replan and plan again.
I think part of that too that often gets forgotten on that contingency planning is because it's such a real component in anything that happens, whether it is something that's more immediate or something that it could be longer term. But how do we deal with the media in that? I was in with the Faith-Based Security Network. They had a guy on from a news channel, and he talked. It was great conversation with him on that, and he really laid it out for churches really well on the importance of having who that spokesperson is going to be and what is the message going to be, and having those contingency messages already in place, and review them as necessary as things change, just like anything else, and establish relationship with your local media as well. It's important for the churches to have a go-to person that they feel they can trust. Who knows, maybe it's a member of their congregation that they say, hey, we want you to be our go-to person, for whatever happens. We want the communication to go through you.
Yeah, and that matters on how the stories can go and how you can be covered, how you have to adapt on the fly in the crisis in the middle of what that looks like. But even to understand that may be that the senior pastor is the spokesperson, and anybody who's delegated to actually contact the press, maybe at this time we have no further comment. Right. And that may just be enough to tell your team that if you're approached by the member of the press, I am not authorized to speak on behalf of the church at this time. You may contact the senior pastor. No further comment at this time. That's it. Right. You teach them that, and that may be the minimum that's necessary. But if you could take it that step further and appoint somebody, that's even better.
And how far do you want them on your property? And how far, what does all that look like depending on the situation?
Well, and that was like navigating COVID. We had a few times, because we were one of the first churches to open back up after the fact last summer. That's a conversation we had, because I said, how do we, I pulled all of the pastors aside and I said, how do you want to handle this? And they're like, well, what do you mean? And I said, I'm not saying I need to be the one to do it, but if all of a sudden we're open, we're running, and channel 6 shows up and says, hey, we want to talk to you because you're open and all these other churches aren't for COVID. How, what's the response? Let's plan. And we set it up. And the plan was, the senior pastor made the choice. He's like, I will talk to them. They're always respectful of us because we give them time. We talk to them. And he's like, look, if I'm not available, then just ask them to wait patiently, or come back at a later time. They're not, I mean, they're people. They're not going to be rude for the most part. They're not going to be rude. And at least our folks around here are typically pretty cordial, but having that discussion made me feel more comfortable, because now I know if I ever see a news truck, pull up, I can address it and go from there. So,
and one good point that he made was that keep in mind that most of your reporters are truly honest, especially your local reporters. They want the truth. They want to represent you in a good light. He says, and as hard as I do to do that, especially as a follower of Christ, he said, you also have to realize I have bosses that are going to make other decisions or edit or whatever else differently than what I otherwise would have.
Absolutely.
We can always, but to have that contingency plan to put our best foot forward with the absolute best communication we can.
Well, and again, if you're not, failing to plan is planning to fail. So if you have those trucks pull in and you don't have a response, you're standing there and you look extremely unprofessional and unprepared, and versus I don't necessarily have to answer to them. I don't have to answer them. I don't have to give a statement. The pastors can handle it. I trust their, obviously their statement, their judgment on it. But at the same time, I can say, you know what, this individual's tied up right now. If you could wait for a few minutes, I'm happy to try and bring them to you when they're available and kind of go from there. And, we've had situations before where pastors weren't available, and I had, a church secretary called me and said, channel such and such is here. What would you like me to tell them? Like, what should I say? How should I handle it? And we don't have anything to hide. I mean, we want to make sure that they present it in a good light. But, there are times where we just have to say, look, you know what? We don't have a comment. So, right. I mean, you do the best you can, but there's a lot of things. There's certainly we've covered and talked about a lot tonight. So there's a lot of things that you can take away from this episode. But the general theme or strand running through it would definitely be planning, and it's good and wise to plan, and certainly biblical, right? And trying to be wise and thinking ahead it's a good opportunity. And I think a lot of times, especially if you're a new team starting off or you're trying to create a team, again, look at it. Yes, you want to be hands-on. Yes, you want to be involved, but at the same time, take a step back and look at the church, look at the schedule, look at the year, and and talk to folks about it. Try and plan out and say, look, okay. And again, that's built relationships for me too. Like going to the pastor and saying, can you explain what's going on? What's happening in October next year? I see this on the calendar. I want to make sure that we're well staffed and that we have, enough volunteers to handle this. If it's a Halloween event or a trunk or treat or something where you've got 1,800 people showing up and you're only expecting 300, like we've had that happen before, so it's crazy. But anyhow, you guys want to add anything?
One last thought: flexibility, efficiency, and always reflective thinking. I think that's the key. Is you're going to plan continually, but you need to be efficient in what you're doing continually, because we're working with a lot to do with not a lot of resources. But we have to reflect continually and make sure we're using the brains that we're given, using the ability to reason and understand and process what we've experienced, so that as we plan for the future, we're putting the best laid plans.
For sure. All right. Well, thanks for hanging out with us tonight. And like we mentioned earlier, next week we will be back with actually pre-recorded episode, but it is brand new, and we'll be talking with Checker about background checks and the importance of doing that for churches and different ministries. So until next time, feel free to visit us at churchsafetyguys.com. Reach out to us if we can be of any benefit to you guys. and we will talk to you next time. So take care. Have a good night. God bless.
Thank you for joining the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys, sponsored by Checker. We hope that you found it informative, and we appreciate your feedback. Be sure to share our broadcast with your teams. Join the discussion online, and for other great resources, download the Church Security app or visit our website at churchsafetyguys.com. Remember, keep a servant's heart, a mindset of ministry, and Semper Disciplina. Always be training. Have a blessed week.